UK cinema history. Chimes at Midnight. 1964. Director Orson Welles.
Hey, Eric.
You put a promo in for us. Thank you, brother.
Very welcome.
We may not have Scylla at all today, and if we do, he's going to be working, so it's going to be on and off. But Yasi did agree to be here if her work allows. But it might be a small room today. But quite honestly, it's the quality, not the quantity, right?
We'll see what happens. Dawn's room is ending soon, but it's still going right now. So we might get some people after Dawn's room is over. Hey, Larry, thank you for being here. Eric, please mod me. And just FYI, also, I didn't get a notification that the room had started. So it could also be that nobody's got a notification yet. Maybe Clubhouse is taking a little while. So let's just get started, and we'll see what happens as we move forward.
Let me just share this on social media and also ping a couple of people who gave me a tentative maybes.
Sure, sounds fun.
Real quick. In the meantime, hi. Maybe you can kind of give just kind of this was your first viewing, I assume, and give us just kind of your opening thoughts on Chimes at Midnight.
I'm gonna wait a few minutes until you do the admin stuff.
That's
So we can have a minute or two of silence.
okay. Even better.
Larry, just FYI, if you'd like to come on stage at any point, you're welcome to. Simply raise your hand. We'll be delighted to bring you up.
All righty, let's get started. I am gonna start with a bias. If I don't do a lot over on the letterbox, but if you go over to my letterbox, you'll see uh, this film listed in my top six films of all time. So, with that bias set aside, um, uh, that this is actually one of the films and it's also one of the films that I've seen the most, which is interesting because it really wasn't available in any kind of a video format until 2016, which is a story we'll get into. But it is a film that I've come back to again and again and again, and it is based on quite honestly, three of my least favorite Shakespeare plays: Henry the fourth parts one and two, and little parts of the Merry Wives of Windsor. I'm actually a much bigger fan of the poetry of Richard II, but when it comes to those histories. However, I don't think that the source material matters when you're dealing with great directors sometimes, because some of the best works I think come aren't necessarily made. I for instance have never seen a truly great version of King Lear, but I've seen several great versions of Shakespeare comedies, and so you can make a great film without it actually being the best of plays. But with that, I'm gonna get high your opening thoughts on Chimes at Midnight, and then I'll get into mine.
Sure, thank you. First of all, Mark, wonderful to have you in the room. Obviously, you're very, very welcome to come on stage at any point. I've already sent you an invite, but if you can't, totally understood as well. But it's really lovely to have you here. Al, thank you for being here. And so, just to give you a sense of how obscure this movie is, um, a couple of years after making, there we go. A couple of years after making Touch of Evil with Charlton Heston, Orson, who he got along with really well, by the way, Orson Welles got a telegram from Heston saying, "I've always wanted to make a movie about Prince Hale and Falstaff. Would you like to be in it?" Heston, who had made, one of Wells's best films with him, didn't know that Chimes at Midnight existed, and was offering him to be in a film about that subject. That's how bad the distribution was for this movie. Part of the problem was the soundtrack had issues. It was not syncing well with the film. That wasn't fixed until the film was restored, finally in 2016. That effort began in 2004, by the same team that restored Othello. Um, and also during the initial release, the movie got panned in the US by New York Times reviewer Bosley Crowther, who wrote, "Evidently, Mr. Wells's reading of Falstaff ranges between a farcical concept of him and a mawkish, sentimental attitude." And that led to the US distributor deciding to essentially not bother distributing it. One other problem is Wells got an investment of $500,000 to complete the film from Albert Broccoli, who just started producing the James Bond films. But then Broccoli made a bunch of bad investments, and he ended up selling his share of a movie to several other people. He split it up among several other people, and the new owners never were able to come together with a decision to push the movie beyond its initial release. So the movie was in limbo for decades. Wells was just plagued with bad luck on this movie. But, and in fact, this was his last non documentary film that was completed in his lifetime. Nonetheless, it was one of Wells's favorites. He said that if one day he went to heaven and he was asked what he'd done to earn entry, he'd show them Chimes at Midnight. It was arguably a deeply personal film, and one in which Wells's acting was at its most vulnerable. In fact, according to Jean Moreau, who played the hooker who's sweet on him, Wells delayed filming for 2 weeks due to stage fright. And also, he he didn't film his scenes with the rest of the actors. He would direct the other actors to do their scenes, and the scenes with him, he would wait until he'd gone home, and then he would direct the scenes with him acting. So it was, he wasn't used to being vulnerable in his performances. And a lot of people feel, again, this was the film where he really um, let himself show. And there's a reason for that. Um, it's, well, let me just say first that in terms of what is a film about at its core, according to Wells' biographer Keith Baxter, It's about uh, uh, a son with two father figures. One father figure, his son is Prince Hal, of course. Um, One father figure is the actual is Falstaff, who he loved but couldn't revere, because Falstaff was not noble in a conventional sense, and was not someone the people could accept. On the other hand, the king was someone that he revered but could not love, because the king was cold. John Gielgud character, Henry IV, the king was a cold man. He was obsessed about the blood on his hands in terms of getting the crown, and is also obsessed about the future and his death instead of living in the moment. You can understand why Hal was attracted to Falstaff, who only lived in the moment for the most part. So they're really the two father figures are at like diametrically opposed positions, and you could see how uh, Hal got valuable things from both of them, but didn't get everything he needed from either of them. Now, but why take this personally? A few reasons. On the one hand, Wells was a lot like Falstaff. There's obviously the the physical similarity, but Wells loved food. He loved women. He lived in the moment. He loved being spontaneous. He loved improvising in his filmmaking, and he continually had money problems because whenever he got some money in, he'd spend it on his next film. Um, of course, Citizen Kane and Magnificent Amberson were studio films, but he kept getting into fights with studio executives and making enemies of studio executives. And then his last two films, Lady of Shanghai and I don't remember what the other one is, they flopped, and no studio would hire him at that point. So he became an indie filmmaker, and which means he had to scrape for every dollar for every film. So he was always short on money and slow paying people. This film, Chimes at Midnight, was made for a paltry $1 million, and astonishing that he had some of the greatest actors like Gielgud uh, and Moreau in it because they loved him. And even though they knew it would be a long time until they got paid, and they wouldn't get paid what they were worth. But yeah, this film was made for a relative pittance. Um, Also, if you look carefully, you'll see some people who appear in the film, and later there are doubles of those people because it couldn't hang on to them long enough to film all the scenes they were in. So he had to let them go and then use doubles to step in for them for later scenes. So there's all kinds of um, uh, cost measures like that. But the other reason it's personal, besides him personally identifying with Falstaff, is that his father was like Falstaff. And Wells had a rough childhood. His mother died when he was 9, and his father was a raging alcoholic. And his father would come to his school plays and shout out comments during the plays. And Wells had his own surrogate father figure, which was the headmaster of his school because he was a prodigy, and everybody knew it. So the headmaster took interest in him, and a strong interest in him. And the headmaster said to him, "Look, your father's out of control. He's an alcoholic. He's not going to stop drinking unless you do some tough love, and tell him he can't see you anymore until he stops drinking." So Wells took that advice, and he told his father that. And a few months later, his father died drinking himself to death in a hotel room. And Wells blamed himself for that death to for the rest of his life. He was convinced it was his fault his father died because he said that to his father. And so if you think of that, and then you think of the scene at the end of a movie, which is just this gut wrenching, heart wrenching scene where Falstaff is so proud and happy of Prince Hal for becoming king, and he presents himself to him to express his delight, and Hal says, "I don't know you, old man. You're banished." That is what I think the way Wells thinks about his life. He was 15 when he told his father that his father was out of his life, and then his father died a few months later at age, well, it was 15. Imagine how devastating that was. When you think of expression on Wells's face in that scene, think of the internal emotion he was feeling living that scene. It's, to me, it's mind blowing. So, so this movie is something I think deeply resonant to Wells, and it explains why he, was so vulnerable in it, and at the same time so hesitant to share that with even the other actors on the set. Um, Roger Ebert wrote, Wells was born to play Falstaff not only because of physical similarity, but because of a rich voice, sonorous and amused, and the shared life experience. Both men lived long and too well, were at odds with the powers at court, and were constantly in debt. Both knew disappointment, and one of the most sublime moments in Wells's career is simply the expression on his face at, at the coronation of Henry V, when he cries out, "God save thee, my sweet boy." And the new king replies, "I know thee not, old man." Um, it's also worth noting Prince Hal is played by Keith Baxter, who looks, um, oh, I think this is also from Ebert, who looks dissolute enough in the Boar's Head Tavern, but comes across as an unpleasant hypocrite in the monologue where he admits his present misdeeds, but promises to reform at the right time. In Shakespeare, this is a soliloquy. In Wells, Falstaff listens in the back and is forewarned. Similarly, um, the prince looks impatiently toward the field of battle as Falstaff behind him questions the concept of honor. So each of them hears the other's soliloquy. In Wells, they're not soliloquies, they both hear each other's speeches. So that kind of adds a whole different dimension that they both understand what's going on and they're moving forward with it anyway. So it's a movie about loss and about betrayal. And on one other dimension that's worth mentioning, it's about the loss of a kind of an Eden. Um, on one level, it's about the loss of an old merry England versus a new, more serious England, about the old ways versus modernization. And I would argue, and I don't see anybody right about this, but to me, it's about the loss of childhood. And the loss of childhood is clearly a huge theme for Wells. Just think about the end of Citizen Kane, where what Kane said was Rosebud. He missed his sled. Um, and I think this is really a metaphor on some level. When Hal has to let go of Falstaff, Falstaff represents a lot of what childhood is, of laughter and joy and living in the moment and not caring for responsibilities. And then he has to grow up and take those responsibilities. And there's a heartbreak to that. Um, we have to grow up, but there's also a tremendous loss to growing up. So I think the movie is about that as well. Um, so I'll just say one other thing in terms of a Falstaff thing. I mentioned Charlton Heston before. Heston also said about Wells, he was somewhat unpredictable, and I think so many things for Orson that he sometimes deliberately painted himself into a corner so he could jump free and show off. Um, and he went on to say that basically Wells would deliberately make studio execs angry at him. And he was saying he was a wonderful director to work with. Actors loved him. So did Cruise. A strange and unhappy thing, he could just charm the birds out of a bloody trees. And I said, actors and crewmen just thought he was great, but he almost deliberately seemed to go to lengths to ignore or even insult studio executives. The crew people and the actors presented no threat to his authority as director, but the studio heads did. Um, so it's again, to me, it's kind of this tug between being a child and being an adult, and not being willing to grow up on some level. I saw an interview with him. Uh, I saw an interview while he was doing the final cuts, the final edits on Chimes at midnight. It was on the Merv Griffin show at the time. It was called just Merv, and he said, the interviewer said to him, a lot of people think the greatest movie of all time was Citizen Kane. What do you think? What do you think about that? And he said, well, I don't know about that, but I would just point out um, that the guy, he said, could there ever be another Citizen Kane? He said, well, it was done under conditions that had never happened before, and so far have never happened again, which is a studio contractually gave me total freedom to do whatever I wanted. And that has never happened since, for me or for anybody else. But if you think that the result was a good result, then maybe that'd be a reason to consider making that happen again. And I felt that was his plea, in a way, to studios, to let him, to hire him and let him do what he wanted instead of looking over his shoulder and telling him what to do. And I just felt so bittersweet that he was making this movie, scraping for every penny, this amazing movie that would have this fated to have this really unfortunate distribution debacle. And he's working so hard, and he just wishes on some level he could go back and work for a studio again, but under his terms. And so there's just so much bittersweet about Wells and his career. I have more to say, like stuff about the battle scene, but uh, that'll do it for now. That's the main stuff I wanted to share.
Thanks, Hi, and I wanted to welcome Bugu and Yasi to the stage. Hello, Bugu. Bugu also runs a movie trivia room here on Clubhouse. How are you today? And have you had a chance to see Chimes at Midnight?
Hi there, Eric. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Unfortunately, no, I haven't had the chance, but I have heard of it. Um, yeah. Um, Thank you for plugging my room. It happens every Tuesday. Um, yeah. Just wanted to uh, say hi to everyone, and I'll just be listening today. Yeah. So thank you for
Well,
inviting me, Eric.
we appreciate you being here, and feel free to chip in if you have any questions. We it's not required that you see the film, to speak here. So
Eric, I
Oh,
just wanted to
great.
say
Thank you.
you're coming in clearly, but your volume is low. If you could get closer to your mic, that might be helpful.
give me just a moment. Okay, we also want to welcome back Yazzie, who, of course, is our part of our regular panel and has been since we were in October when we first really started doing these rooms regularly. Yazzie, welcome. A couple of people that we've talked about over the months are in here. Of course, the famous ones like John Gielgud and Jean Moreau. But Fernando Rey as the Earl of Worcester was interesting to see, and our girl Ingrid Pitt. Oh, hey.
Somebody's gonna coming from here, okay?
Oh, okay.
A few minutes.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Yazzie.
So I almost said it all. The other thing that was so striking to me throughout the film was this duality that we could see. The duality in the actings, the duality in the techniques of filmmaking, like the environment, the between the tavern and the castle, uh, and yeah. So that's it. And one other thing that this time that I was watching it, uh, was really interesting to me was, I don't know why, but it reminded me so much. The costumes reminded me so much of Polanski's Macbeth, and I was thinking that how much the costume design on the battle scenes in Polanski's play a very important role on those characters and their performances. Like, we on the final battle, we see the weight of these armors on the actors, and this back and forth. Uh, the this we could see like these knights, what they go through in medievals. And I really like that, the desperation, their exhaustion. And it was all through these costume design. And what happened here this time that I was watching, the funny thing was, I saw that at the battle scene in the middle, I saw Falstaff on that armor, and how he was this caricature like of a knight. And again, just like what I was talking about, like with this low budget, and how like this talent of um Orson Welles, that he could put it off. And comparing to Polanski's, and still we could see like what he could do with the environment, with the costume design, and with the actings. And I told you, Eric, in the back channel, it was right, it was like, this time that I was watching it, it gave me the sense of a noir Shakespeare, like the atmospheric, this noir atmospheric of, I think, more than the Falstaff character himself, that was so, everyone's talking about that it's so similar to Orson Welles himself. But yeah, but Orson Welles, before he becomes this huge giant man, before he goes through all these failure in life, he was interested in Falstaff. So there are other aspects of this, like this duality that I was talking about at the beginning, that we see in the performances and in the techniques. Like, Orson Welles puts his signature, his noirish signature, on a Shakespearean play. I mean, a few Shakespearean plays. So, and that's what I really liked. And he could still use what he had at his disposal to create, I mean, to put his signature, his Wells signature, on the film. And yeah, these are the my first thought. And I think, in the when we look at it, when we look at this, um the this environment that I said, like, or the themes, like the joy in the tavern, comparing to that, mm, this the in the in the court, and the livelihood and the death, the and uh the lights, you know it was the sounds that everyone was like, all the critics at the time, like, we keep talking about. But I could feel that, how still, with all those like poor sound quality, we could still hear the joy that Hal was having with Falstaff, comparing to the silence, to, because silence on the in the castle, uh it has a weight, and it's like we hear the silence, we feel that a strange relationship between a father and a son. And uh the use of sound, the use of visual techniques, the lights, the costumes, everything. It's it's really Wells at its best, despite like the the money that he never had. And I think these things, I mean, you can be your best regardless of what's going on. And all these, this is the duality that I see throughout the film that we can talk about later. But I have a question for you, Eric. We saw Beckett, we saw Man for All Season, we saw King Lear, we watched Lear, we watched, and now we watch Chimes at Midnight. What is it with the kings and their best friends? Like, why they like Henry II got rid of Beckett, Henry VIII got rid of Thomas, and in Man for All Season, Thomas Cromwell. Here,
More.
Henry Fifth got rid of Falstaff, and so on. What is it? What's going on with this? Like, why they love to get
Well,
rid
the
of their buddies? I'm
question, the
sorry.
question then, Yasi, is who is betraying whom, though? In all of those cases, we are seeing works of art that are taking the point of view of the person who the king supposedly betrayed. But in the case of Thomas à Becket, who betrayed whom in that case? He made, Henry II made him Archbishop of Canterbury, and he betrayed him. He sided with the Pope. He sided with the Catholic Church, and he. In the case of Thomas More, here this was someone who Henry VIII had turned to at his great hour of need, and More said, no, his version of "I know ye not, old man," when he was asked to grant up the simple leadership of the Church of England, and to break with over 1,000-year connection with the Catholic Church, and completely change the religion of every citizen of England. I mean, what? Not, it wasn't like he was asking to screw his wife or something. In this case, really, and that there's that great line when somebody shouts after Falstaff, God send the king a better companion, and he says, God send the companion a better king. But Falstaff repeatedly betrays Henry's trust. When Henry trusts him to raise troops, Falstaff raises the worst troops possible. God spare me the great men, and give me the spare ones, he says. And when it's pointed out to him that the troops that couldn't afford to pay him off to get out of pricking are pretty weak, he says, they're good enough as cannon powder. They're good enough to fill the death pits. And in that long battle scene, which it's almost 7 minutes of the film, what we see time and time again is every single one of Falstaff's recruits dying on the battlefield, and not just dying on the battlefield, but dying from their own ineptitude, because they aren't experienced soldiers, because he has misused the king's money damnably, as he even admits. And and you have that horrifying scene where his words actually come to fruition, when you see men who are still alive but suffering from injury, being thrown into pits and buried with the dead. And again, not a single one of Falstaff's soldiers survived. So when Henry, upon seeing Falstaff fake his death, mourns him, Falstaff then turns around and attempts to take credit for, well, he does take credit for killing Hotspur. And this isn't in the play, this is only in Wells's film, but since we're talking about Wells's film, I'm going to use it to answer your question with, because in the play, Harry is more than willing. He says, if he says to Falstaff in a line that's cut out, "Hey, if a lie will serve you well, then a lie I'll tell," which is his basically way of saying, yeah, fine, you can have this one, Falstaff. But in the film, you see he is deeply betrayed by this, and time and time again, people are coming to him, and his father says to him, "I usurped the throne of Richard II, a man who was," and he's using queer coding now, "effeminate and surrounded himself with disreputable favorites for that sin. And Hotspur is raising rebellion now against me, and my son is committing these exact same sins." He says, as I was to Richard II, art Hotspur to me, and as Richard II was to me, thou art to Hotspur. And first of all, that establishes the duality that you were speaking of, but it also goes to that central betrayal. But then in that duality, that betrayal also cuts down Harry Hotspur's way, and you have Fernando Rey as the as Wooster, betraying him when the king sends a pardon and says that he'll retrieve them fully in their love, and basically says, "And I will solve all of the issues. We'll ransom Mortimer. And we'll call it a day. There needs not be a bit of bloodshed." And Wooster, realizing that, of course, the king may do that for Harry Hotspur, but he's not going to do that for Wooster, doesn't tell him. Betrayal. And then his own father doesn't show up because he's sick, supposedly. And Owen Glendower, who the Prince of Wales, who that's a much bigger deal in the play, but doesn't show up, and he is betrayed, and Henry, by not allowing himself to fall into his group of favorites the same way Richard II did, and the same way Harry Hotspur does not share their fate. And in fact, he is known as one of the two greatest kings in England, the other being Edward the Third. Can anyone give me the reason why the English consider those two the two greatest kings in English history? Anyone? Because no one killed more Frenchmen than Edward III and Henry II.
Yep. And so I now that you brought up Betrayal, I have another question. So in this movie, in case of Falstaff and Hal, so basically from the beginning, Hal, he admits that this is uh he's only having fun with Falstaff. He knows that he has bigger royal responsibilities. He's not and also I think also Falstaff knows it, or at least in the it's not in the play, but I felt that in Orson Welles' rendition of, or like his take from Falstaff at the end, when at that, because this is not a play about Henry V. This is a movie about Falstaff. So what happens at the moment that he gives this rejection speech, uh we see we see how brokenhearted Falstaff is, but at the same time there is this look, the movie's full of close-ups. So, but what we see at Orson Welles' face is that moment of pride that because he knows that, like, it's like he's saying that, oh yeah, my son has grown up. He chose the right path, you know, and that was the feeling that I got. That I didn't feel the disappointment. I didn't feel the betrayal. I felt like they had this Don Quixote Sancho Panza relationship, kind of,
And it's
metaphorically.
there's a duality, and yes, you're right, and it is, there's a duality here between Henry the fourth, part one and two. In part one, you have, banish pawns, you know, banish Petro, banish Bardolph, but sweet Falstaff, Jack Falstaff, kind Jack Falstaff, valiant Jack Falstaff, and therefore more valiant being as he's old Jack Falstaff, banish not him, banish plump Jack Falstaff, and banish all the world. And I'm probably getting the quote wrong, but that is at the same segment of part one as Shakespeare puts in part two, the "I know thee not, old man" scene, and you see the transition between Jack then and the more mature Jack, who accepts his fate, and they add a scene from Henry V, which actually had to do, I believe it was with Pistol, who was given forgiveness for having been drunk, where they give Henry the line in this, of Henry showing leniency towards him and not having him arrested. And it was, is probably too much wine, but Falstaff just kind of matter of factly turning to Master Shadow and saying, I owe you £1,000, and it becomes transactional. And then we find that the king had broken his heart and that Falstaff had died, which, and there's reasons why in Henry V that happens off stage, mostly having to do with the comic actor who played Falstaff. He also played the fool in King Lear for Shakespeare, kind of getting into a war of words with Richard Burbage, who was playing Henry V in the play, because Burbage felt like he was improvising too much, but that there's your duality again, because Henry IV and Hal both always speak in verse in these plays, whereas Falstaff and the rest, even though Falstaff is a knight, even though he has a sir on his title, always speaks in regular prose. And so so Hal is given this eloquence, and this poetry, and Falstaff has to reply to these poems with just kind of gritty words, So when Henry in perfect iambic pentameter says, "Why thou owest God a death," Falstaff says, "'Tis not due yet. I'd be low to pay them before his day." And then he gives the second of two great speeches about honor. He asks, "Can it set a leg? Can it take away a wound? Has it any skill in surgery? Well, what is it?" And his answer, "A trim reckoning. Who hath it He who died a Wednesday, does he feel it? No. Does he hear it? No. 'Tis intestinal or insensible then, yea, to the dead. But will it live with the living? Why? Uh, and then he says, I'll have none of it. Honor is a mere scrutton. And so ends, he says, my catechism. And it's very interesting to point out that the original name of John Falstaff in the first draft of this play was John Oldcastle, who was a real knight who led a rebellion against Henry V and was actually burned at the stake for heresy by Henry V. And there really was a friendship between the two, but that the John Oldcastle was not a robber, and but he maybe ran with kind of a dangerous crowd. But his sin was what was called Protestantism, and we don't know really what happened, but legend always had it that somebody from Oldcastle's family talked him out of it, but of calling him Oldcastle, and ended up calling him Falstaff. But more legitimately, Oldcastle is in Fox's Book of Martyrs that was published in so about 3 years before this. So in I would say 1592, and was considered a great Protestant, and in a land that was Protestant, to make your anti-hero a Protestant, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So you have to give him other sin. But the second thing is, if you look into Oldcastle's family line, which I did because I'm like, well, who would have talked Shakespeare out of this? Who from Oldcastle's family was still alive 200 years later? They were highway robbers at this point. These were people who had gotten a knighthood through generation after generation after generation, and were out actually robbing in the countryside, and using their knighthood, and using their ability of arms, and that was the Oldcastle family. And there you see the creation of Jack Falstaff, the friend who is betrayed, or who has his back turned on by the king in real life for religious reasons, but then taking the real Oldcastle family and what they were doing, and implanting that on him. But and I'm talking too long, and as I always do, I'm afraid. But what by telescoping the part one and part two together, he has created, I think, a great kind of anti-war document, because what is meant to be humor, what is meant to be a satire of what Oldcastle's religious beliefs were, what was called the Lollards' religious beliefs were about honor, is a satire to these people, because of course this was during one of those pieces during the 100 Years' War, where all the soldiers were home. And yes, the soldiers, while they were home, were hanging out at places like the Boar's Head, and using their ability that they had learned over in France, to support themselves through robbery, because they weren't able to make the living that they had been. But anyway, I'll let somebody else speak for a
Well,
bit.
first of all, thank you for sharing all of that. That's all fascinating. I'm going to share more of my research, since we're now well into the room. First of all, Mark was kind enough to point out Margaret Rutherford is in the film, talking about great actors in the movie, in addition to John Gielgud, Jean Moreau, Fernando Rey, and Rolf Richardson as the narrator. So thank you, Mark. Absolutely. And one of the interesting things about this is that it's not a filming of a Shakespeare play straight. It's cobbled together from different plays and excerpted and moving lines around. Sometimes Wells gave a line to one character that was Shakespeare actually gave to a different character in a different context. So technically, there's no there's no line in the film that isn't Shakespeare, but there's a lot of editing, and this was not the first time Wells did it. He actually did it the first time when he was 16, when he played King Richard III, and he boiled that play down to 45 minutes. So Wells has a long history of messing with Shakespeare. And John Houseman, I like this little story if I can find it. Back in the days of a Mercury Theater, John Houseman was asked when Orson Welles' production of Julius Caesar would open. And he said, when Wells finishes writing it. So there's a rich history of Wells messing with Shakespeare. And it takes a certain amount of balls to do that. And Wells had balls, and God bless him for it. Also, some other things I found interesting. Why is this filmed in black and white? Wells was asked that, and he said, black and white is the actor's friend. He said that black and white is a medium where you can really pay attention to the acting, whereas film, in his view, color took away from that. And there was also a feeling, I think, that color was for like comedies and musicals, but not for serious films. So interesting. I mean, whether you agree or not, an interesting perspective. Also, it was a film, black and white was a film for faces. Um, and he cared very much about faces in this film. They actually used high contrast photography to emphasize the black and white nature of it. And to create, they used a lot like light through the windows, because that was really that castle they were filming in was a mess. It was a rundown mess, but they they fixed it up with camera tricks to make it seem incredibly majestic. A lot of that was camera tricks and light coming through, and also they would um, right before a shoot, they would sprinkle aluminum dust before a window, so the lighting would be really prominent. The dust would last for 30 seconds, so that was enough time for them to get a shot. So it was a lot of stuff going on there. Um, and the costumes, Yasi mentioned the costumes, they were designed by Wells. Um, Wells, was a prodigy. He could do anything. He did the costume design, and he did the set design. Um, and in fact, they delayed. They 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 were complaining that he was taking time on designing the sets that they could have been shooting. And he said, I know what I'm doing, and he did, because as it turned out, because of his design, everything went smoothly on the shooting, because everything they needed to do was already taken into account by the way he designed things. Um, Also, his love of improvisation, and also his saving money. Um, he cast a lot of people who'd never acted before to be in the film. Like they would go to dinner and he'd say, "Oh, that waiter is an interesting face," and he would cast the waiter. So in the opening title sequence, when they're like marching and a guy's hat falls off, a soldier's hat falls off, and he goes back to retrieve it, that was not scripted. That really happened. That guy was like one of the waiters. Um, and his hat really blew off, and his natural impulse was, I'll go back and get it. And Wells loved that that happened. And arguably, if that had been an actual actor, he would have said, "Oh, I've screwed up a shot. You have to, let's stop shooting. We have to redo it." But because the man had no experience, he went back and got his hat back and just kept walking forward again. And Wells thought that looked so natural because it was natural, and so he kept it. as part of the opening. As for the on the other thing with the battle, um, it rained that day. That was not in the script either. But it just rained and poured. And Wells, instead of saying, "Oh, we have to just push off," he couldn't push it off because he'd hired or gotten hold of somehow the army for a battle sequence for 2 days. He had 2 days. So if he couldn't scrub a day out of the 2 days. So what he decided was, I'm going to make it a very muddy battle. And he used the mud, he integrated the mud into just spontaneously into this will be a very muddy, messy battle. And so he rolled with it. And also, speaking of rolling with it, because it was so slippery because of all the rain, the guy who was a director of photography, he slipped and hit his head and got a concussion within a few hours of filming. And he was raced to the hospital. Wells just picked up his camera and kept filming. So Wells was the photographer for a lot of the battle sequence because the guy who was supposed to do it slipped on the damn rain and busted his head. Um, but the show goes on. So Wells was very, very given to, making decisions in the moment and going with it. The armor that Yasi mentioned was plastic. It was not metal. They Wells looked at the metal. He said, "It's almost impossible to move in these things. I don't know how in God's name they used to get on horses with this, but this is not practical." So the armor in the battle sequence was actually made out of plastic. Um, and let's see.
Mark, let's welcome Mark. Hi,
Oh
Mark.
yeah,
Welcome.
Mark, it's so great to see you. Thank you for coming on stage. Mark, please.
I can't hear him though.
Mark, if you're talking, we can't hear you. No, still don't hear you. It could be a clubhouse bug. You could try two things. You could try exiting the room and coming back. If that doesn't work, well, let's see if that
Well,
works.
we'll try that. Hell,
Yeah.
why? And I'd like to welcome Mark to the stage.
Okay, so that didn't work. The other thing is to just reboot your phone, and then that'll definitely work. Reboot the phone, come back in. That should definitely work. I've run into this before, and that's what I went through. That leaving the room doesn't work with rebooting, and this is just a current version of Clubhouse. The next update, this bug might go away, but that's what's currently the situation. Um, I
And we'll get newer and stronger bugs.
and Adam, I think, is coming to the stage now. Hey, Adam, great to see you.
Hi,
Hi,
Adam.
Eric. Yasi, hi, guys. Wonderful pick. What a beautiful film. And of a, I mean, man, Wells, what a career. Fighting tooth and nail to scrounge up the resources to make anything he could. And this is one of his best. It really is. And it's in a catalog of great films that he himself made or was a part of. But also in the realm of Shakespearean adaptations on film. I don't know if anything tops this.
Yeah, but
The ones that
throughout
come
the
to mind, my
throughout
personal top.
but throughout history, everyone was praising Laurence Olivier's adaptation of Shakespeare and not Welles's. That's the other thing that I want to talk about.
And 2 weeks from now, we'll be talking about that film. So,
Yeah, I think with Wells, I mean it was it's like premeditated career murder after Citizen Kane, of course, and the way I think it was Robert Robert Wise or whatever it was, the editor of Citizen Kane, and is it Robert Wise? He
Yeah,
did
yeah,
he
yeah. It
directed.
was Robert Wise who edited
Yeah.
Citizen and did the editing job, but that partially was Wells's fault because he left editing directions and then went off to South America to film It's All True, and just kind of expected to come back and have the film edited the way. And you can't edit a film based on directions because there's so much of it is instinctive. You know, there's a rhythm and a gut
Mm.
thing. And so when a director does that and says, okay, and especially a director like Wells who didn't have the fundamentals of film down yet, he did by the time he made this film. He knew,
Mhm.
he could say, okay, because you saw he picked up from Greg Tolan the use of the wide angle lenses and the low camera angle, like sometimes they're set on floor, and you see that in this film. But he did. But at the time of Amberson's, when his career kind of went to pot, he had no idea what lens went with what lens, and so he would leave instructions of cutting from a very wide angle to something that was extremely close up without a fade or anything like that. And Wise would be like, "That's not going to work. You can't do that because the human brain doesn't process that way." And had Wells been there, he would have seen that and come up with a different idea. And so when they premiered the film that Wise cut, the way that Wells had left instructions for, of course it got an incredibly bad reception because it didn't look right. Scenes didn't taste right. And that allowed the RKO to butcher the film because it got such a bad preview reception. So I actually blame Wells for that. Welcome back, Mark. Can you speak just so we can see if we can hear you?
Hey, Mark.
Am I now in the Matrix with all of you?
Oh, what a
Yay!
wonderful voice, too.
I think
Yeah.
I think I
Yeah,
was
by
on
the
Clubhouse.
pricking.
I think I was on Clubhouse too long in the audience. I was in Dawn's room previously, and I think it just locks up or something. So great to be here. Thanks for inviting me up.
Mark, could we get some of your thoughts on Chimes at Midnight?
I just don't know where to begin. There isn't an Orson Welles anything that I don't like. I have something of a thing for Orson Welles. So I'll start personally and then work outward. How about that, real fast? My favorite
Beautiful.
stage injury. I don't like the histories very much, by and large, Shakespeare's histories, but my favorite stage injury was actually in a production of Henry IV, Part One. I was a spear carrier. I think it was 1984. Richard Egan, big Hollywood career, was doing stage work and back on television, and he was our Falstaff until heart trouble made him leave the production. And then Roy Brocksmith came in. A lot of people might know him from the Schwarzenegger Total Recall. And my favorite stage injury at the beginning of the battle scenes, I come running out there, and somebody, I forget, it was gave me the hugger mugger, and the whole combat is supposed to happen, and the other actor hit me on the back of the head with a shield. He was drunk, and this erupted in chaos because I stumbled off stage, not making my next cue. All of the combat fell apart. The director had been out of town, came back that day to see his entire battle sequence come to a screeching halt. So that's one of the few times I've done anything with a Falstaff on stage. You
Mark,
mentioned something.
let me before we get off stage, let me just briefly share a Wells story about doing Shakespeare on stage. He was doing Henry IV Part One in Massachusetts, and he had a bunch of Harvard boys as behind the scene extras. Their job was to shoot arrows at a giant corkboard across the stage, and it was a revolving stage, and they were supposed to shoot at a certain line. So the first night they're performing, and the line comes a little bit too early. The stage is still revolving, and if they would shoot their arrows, they'd be shooting them into the audience. And Wells is thinking, well, they're from Harvard. They know enough to not shoot into the audience. They have that much common sense. No, they did not. They shot 40 arrows into the audience. And as Wells said, I think we winged 3 dowagers and 2 critics. So I just wanted to share that. I knew, Mark, you'd especially appreciate that stage story. I'll shut up and let you keep talking.
No. That's a great story, and I've witnessed Christopher Plummer lose a sword into the audience, and yeah, I mean that's interactive. That's theater at its height, at its most interactive. I think that's really pretty good stuff. I would have tried to repeat that every night, but I'm not Orson Welles. Eric, you mentioned something earlier, talking about the cast, that Ingrid Pitt is in it uncredited. Ingrid and I were great friends until her death 14 years ago or so. And we talked a lot about her experiences in our friendship. We were trying to get a film off the ground up until the time she passed away. And so,
Yeah, Yasi and I are both very big fans of her, almost as big as her chest. Is how big our fandom is of
Oh my,
Ingrid
the
Pitt.
vampire lovers, we couldn't stop admiring her boobs.
well,
Despite
yeah,
everything, like wow, we couldn't
yeah.
stop looking at them.
I mean, Hammer knew what they were doing in the
A
'70s.
they are a national treasure on 3 continents.
Yeah, we were trying to get a version that I had written of Telltale Heart off the ground, and she was to play the wife and owner of a boarding house right after Lincoln's assassination, and Robert Quarry was going to play the owner, the old man with the eye. And Bob passed away first, and Ingrid would call me at 3 o'clock in the morning and suggest other actors, and we tried. Um, Chimes at Midnight is so brilliant, and you've talked a lot about Wells and Shakespeare, and the obvious thing is that it's wonderful to understand Shakespeare. It's wonderful to understand the plays, the history of the plays. But truly, I think that Wells, when he gets his hand on virtually anything, his films are based on books. There's very little that's original outside of the documentaries, things like F for Fake, where he's pursuing themes and ideas that might be original to him. They're all adaptations of something. And from the very beginning, as High pointed out, from the Todd School in high school on, the radio adaptations, the Mercury Theater stage things from Macbeth to, you had mentioned Julius Caesar, to the films. And there's not one I love them all. I even love the RKO Macbeth, and Othello is quite wonderful. And they all have similar limitations in budget. They all, 2 obviously out of the 3, Chimes
I'm
and,
going to take just a moment,
Othello, have,
Mark, and set one thing straight.
yeah,
Chimes at Midnight had the same budget as Doctor No. Harry Saltzman was the producer on both of them.
yeah, about $1.6 million or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Wells
Well,
had
Chimes was $1 million.
well,
The big difference between $1.6 million and $1 million.
Chimes was $1 million before post production, and Harry Saltzman came in with enough money to save it. It's one of those stories where everything's off the books. But Wells had a lot of money by his standards. That's twice what he spent on Citizen Kane. That's 3 times what he spent on. That's 9 times what he spent on Othello. The problem with Chimes at Midnight, of course, was that it was filmed. They hired one of those accountants that said, "Yeah, you can do this, 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 and this, and it's going to cost $4 million." Fired him and hired a guy who said, "Yeah, no, you can get all this done for $1 million." And Harry Saltzman had to come in and bail it out. But what a lot of people at the time pointed out was that while this movie cost a hell of a lot of money by Orson Welles standards, and was probably the most expensive independently produced film at the time, not a lot of that showed up on screen because it was for hotel bills, while Wells would run out of money and have to keep his cast in Spain while he tried to go raise more money. And so, according to the best estimates, about 800,000 of it ended up on screen. So sorry about that, Mark. I'll let you continue.
No, in great detail. That's very accurate. All of that. And there are other things about the release of it. Saltzman's decision to lessen. I mean, Shakespeare just doesn't sell in the United States. I don't care what it is. Perhaps the exception of a couple of the Hollywood films, and I'm thinking of things like Midsummer Night's Dream, that had.
The Brando version of Julius Caesar did well.
Yeah, and but it also depends on a certain amount of star power. Heston's star power, Brando at the time, although his reputation was beginning to change a little bit by obviously the early 70s. But another thing that pops to mind, which I find is a wonderful piece of apocrypha to the entire Falstaff Wells Chimes at Midnight thing, is in the 60s, a lot of actors doing television. I'm thinking of Charles Laughton doing readings on talk shows, on Ed Sullivan, on the Dean Martin show, and there's a wonderful 7-minute segment from the Dean Martin show. Wells was on the Dean Martin show several times. Sometimes there's a whole routine where they spoof radio plays and War of the Worlds. But there's a marvelous one with Wells where he makes up as Falstaff, a wig and a mustache, and and then he goes into one of the speeches, and it's on YouTube, you can find it everywhere. Uh, that's kind of wonderful to see. Um, Talk about singing for your supper, as Wells went into the 70s, and getting financing was getting worse and worse and worse. But then directly about Chimes at Midnight, yeah, I hold that film in great esteem. And it's odd, of my top favorite Wells films, that one is up there with something as completely disparate and different as F for Fake, which I still am learning from Wells as an adapter, as an editor, as an actor. It's quite amazing. And then the last thing, I'll go back to something personal. Uh, since the fall, I've gotten a little bit close to Beatrice Wells. I was supposed to be doing now. I was supposed to be doing a stage production of Moby Dick Rehearsed, playing the actor manager who then plays Lear for a moment, and Father Mapple, and then Ahab for about an hour and a half. And I had surgery on the 15th, and we had to cancel things. And Beatrice found out about the production. We weren't even advertising widely. This all came through Ray, who runs Wells.net, which is an absolute gold mine of Wells information on the internet. And so if it's truly a postponement and we do it again one day, but this again, I mention that in some ways because of Wells' approach to adaptation and what he did and where he borrows ideas or ideas of others, scholars or what have you, feed a thought of his at the day. Because when he did Moby Dick in London, which you speak about casting for this, and friends of his and marvelous actors like Gielgud Richardson narrating. I love Margaret Rutherford in Chimes at Midnight. But in his 3-week run of Moby Dick in London, Patrick McGowan was Starbuck, Judi Dench was Pip, the cabin boy. Marvelous thing. And his adaptation is so clean and so concise, and he latches on one clear thing to turn this massive novel, which is frankly difficult to read today or then, I can't imagine, and really make it this searing 2 hour. So every time he has approached Shakespeare, whether it was in the 30s, his Macbeth, whether it's his Julius Caesar, whether it's the films he managed to make, there is very clear, very solid. He grabs it by the neck and really makes it his own. Everybody's Shakespeare, but really makes it his own. I do in my collection have original editions of the Todd School books and some reprints of some things that were republished over the years. Because you've touched on this too, designing his own costumes. I just love his sketches. I love his
and his own makeup.
and his own makeup. I mean, the whole thing about
Those
the whole
fake
thing
those
is
fake
And that
noses.
makeup, the makeup that you're talking about is exactly on that 7 minute.
yeah, and it's all stage makeup. I mean, the nose is pre-made there. And the thing is that is kind of fascinating about, and this is just actor talk for a moment, Wells and his nose and how he perceived himself. And even when he was younger and svelte, he had a very cherubic round face, and it only got bigger and broader. But his nose always, I think, bothered him. He referred to himself in an interview, and maybe this is stuff that comes out of all of the Peter Bogdanovich recordings and Bogdanovich's great book, which encapsulates and edits down the Wells interviews that he did. That he felt of it as of himself that he was quote unquote a king actor. He was one of these actors that was very, very large, and not physically, but in spirit, in temperament. In some ways, I can put on that same shelf an actor like a Zero Mostel, who could be very subtle, could be very gentle, could be very laser like, but in general, filled a role so fully, so largely, whether it was stage like a Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof, or whether it was a film like The Producers, or
Or
the
Brex Galileo.
Brex Galileo. Again, I'm scattering now because I'm also thinking of Charles Laughton, who could be that way and yet be very real. And but the noses thing, just to get pounced back on that for a moment, that is also throughout his entire career from when he was a teenager, playing with makeup, playing with the mask to bring out other reality. And you look throughout all of his films, and if he's in them, there is some, and it all, I think, holds up to this day. All of the makeup artists that he's worked with, whether it's the thing to pull his jowls up to make his Kane a little younger, or the age makeup in Kane, just marvelous stuff. So I'll just stop my ramble and babble by saying I have always, from the beginning of time, I can't even remember when I first stumbled into Orson Welles, but I'm an enormous fan, and I just continue to learn from him on every level. Absolutely. So just happy to talk about this film with you guys and continue listening.
Not a
Well, we
ramble at
appreciate you
all.
joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Not a ramble at all. It's always a great treat and an honor to have you on any stage. I'm delighted that you know Beatrice Wells. That's awesome. I saw an interview with her about this. And, Wells didn't let her go to school, but she traveled with him and his wife around the world. So the world was her school. And she learned multiple languages by being in multiple countries. And she's in this movie. Wells asked her to be in the movie, and she said no. She said, "Do you want to act in my movie?" No. And he asked her again, and she said no again. And he said, "I'll pay you." And she said, "Okay." And then she did the movie. She played Boy, and they dubbed a voice, a male voice for her. And then she was 9 at the time. And then at the end of the movie, she said, "He never paid me." So, but yeah, she's a delightful person. She's very, very well adjusted, very mature, very wise. So it's awesome that you know her, and thank you for mentioning
I
that.
I just want to say how utterly Falstaffian of him not to pay her, because of course one of my favorite lines is I do not like this paying back. 'Tis a double effort. There was a lot of Falstaff in Wells as well as Wells in Falstaff, I think, because of course didn't he originally try to get this done by tricking a producer into putting up funds for what was supposed to be an adaptation of Treasure Island, and
Yes, that's
so
correct.
I mean, what a Falstaffian move, lie after lie after lie, but being so charming you just get away with
Yeah,
it,
he
which
even showed them the ship that they would film Treasure Island in. They found a ship that he could show them. This is what Roger Ebert said. There was not something Falstaffian about Wells. There was everything. As a young man, he conquered all that came before him. At Shrewsbury, a knight meekly surrenders to the old man, awed by the leftover reputation. Wells grew fat and in debt, took jobs unworthy of him, was was trailed by sycophants and leeches, yet was loved by good women and honored by those who could see him clearly. And he battled on, quixotic as well as Falstaffian, commencing grand schemes and sometimes actually finishing them. Indeed, his Don Quixote can now be seen in intriguing but incomplete form.
This touches on a couple of things that I find fascinating and parallel about Wells' career and his life, which I think are related to talking about this film. When one really looks at the arc of the relationship that he had with Peter Bogdanovich, the making of The Other Side of the Wind, the two roles, the one that Bogdanovich started playing in the film, and then the one he ended up playing, which was very much like himself, as the young director usurping. You can make a stretch where there is a Falstaff Hal kind of thing happening here. The other thing that is a complete wonderful conversation to have is this entire journey that Wells has with Treasure Island and producer Harry Alan Towers, and the idea that it was something that stayed alive over several years until, in fact, the film was made that Harry Alan Towers produced, and the this, what is the pseudonym that Wells used? It's oh my God. It always reminds me of W.C. Fields' Mahatma Caine Jeeves pseudonym when he wrote screenplays, because it was his adaptation of the thing. He had done Treasure Island on radio with the Mercury Players. Um, and this is another weird piece of personal trivia, because I was friends with Harry Alan Towers' widow, Maria Rom, for a number of years until she passed away. We had talked about some things that he had still owned. Believe it or not, he owned, and this has all changed, but he owned film rights to the character of Fu Manchu, even though that character is now in the public domain, and you would have to treat that very, very differently today than you would when Sax Rohmer was writing, back at the beginning of the last century. But all of that digression to say that the whole creation of, by the time, what is it, 71 or 72, that film of Treasure Island finally gets made. That's in currency. This entire process through the late 60s, and keeps knocking around until it just manifests. It's fascinating to me that happened. And again, I'll just to cap, the relationship he had with Peter Bogdanovich, one of sycophant, one of acolyte, one of fan, one of equal, one of true equal friendship, one of usurpation. There's a very clear arc there, in a weird sort of way, in their real. And Bogdanovich just talked about it, and others who were very close to him, close to Wells and Bogdanovich at the time. Gary Graver, the cameraman who had worked with Wells a lot in the 70s and early 80s. So it's interesting to take a look at that. And then, of course, we get the finished film completed to get The Other Side of the Wind posthumously, and there is the footage of Bogdanovich playing the other character, and then he becomes, the character that is much more like Bogdanovich was when he was making things like What's Up, Doc and Paper Moon and things like that. Anyway, I digress, but all of this is kind of interesting to me.
O.W. Jeeves, I think, is who you're. It was Orson
That's
Welles'
it.
pseudonym.
O.W. Jeeves, and it's very because
Yeah.
Wells had one, and it was
He got it from
McCain
Wooster and Jeeves from P.G. Woodhouse.
right.
I'd like to welcome Matt to the stage. Matt, it's good to see you. I hope your appearance last time got you some extra pre-orders on your book, but we won't know till it comes out, right?
That's right, but that's fine. Thank you for that. But yeah, Chimes of Midnight. I'm sorry I'm a bit late to this, but yeah, I haven't seen it since college. But thinking back on it, what I appreciate about it is it's a Shakespeare adaptation that kind of takes a composite of one character through different plays, and so many Shakespeare adaptations, even all these decades later, just kind of do a pretty straight adaptation of a play, albeit in sometimes contemporary settings or what have you. And it would be fun to see kind of a newer Shakespeare film using a structure not unlike Chimes of Midnight. And that
Well, this was remade as My Own Private Idaho
okay,
in 91 or 92, Mark? I can't remember, but with River Phoenix and
that's fine.
Keanu Reeves.
Yeah,
And it was set in modern day, and they were Falstaff was the head of the street hustlers, and they were gay prostitutes in, I think it was Washington State somewhere, like Seattle or something like that. I can't quite remember, but yeah. But so yeah, there is a modern day adaptation out there. I haven't seen it since probably, well, since the early '90s.
interesting. Okay, I didn't know that. Didn't make that connection, but I haven't seen it in such a long time.
Well,
But yeah,
it's a Gus
thank you.
Van Sant. It's a Gus Van Sant film. And what I remember was interesting was that Van Sant had seen a 16 millimeter print of what was called Falstaff, Chimes at Midnight, but he'd never actually seen a production of or read either the Henry IV or the Merry Wives of Windsor or even Richard III, and so he had actually based the film completely on his interpretation of Welles's film. And he saw something that I saw this viewing, which was what we now call queer coding of it. And he decided to make an entire film about that.
That's cool. You made it on like the memories of watching a film instead of studying it fastidiously as he did with his Psycho remake.
Well, at that point you couldn't, because this up until about 2016, the only place you could see, the first time I saw this film was in a library on old 16 millimeter. The sound was just horrible. It sounded like everybody was gargling razor blades, and the film was washed out and scratchy and had the dust balls on it, and yet I still thought it was a masterpiece. And when it finally came out with the restored version in 2016, honestly, I was a little bit disappointed, because some of what the charm of it was to me was kind of the naughtiness of having seen that other print, because it was something that I could kind of say, I've seen this, and and explain to people, not in a kind of I'm better than you way, but that I had like, gosh, oh, if only you had seen type of a way. And of course, when it became available to everyone, I just simply expected it to zoom up and be, replace Vertigo as the number one best movie of all time on sight and sound, and that didn't happen. But at least it's replaced The Trial, the kind of number one curio Wells film from the 60s. But it is interesting that Wells did the same kind of casting for this that he did with Anthony Perkins in The Trial, which is in this case. Uh, taking openly gay actors and putting them in the lead role. So you had Beckley as Poins, and this is the old Alfred Hitchcock trick, isn't it? But and Keith Baxter, who of course was dating Nuria, the ballet dancer at the time, as Prince Hal, and then telescoping almost every line from Henry, suggesting that Prince Hal might be a little light in his loafers to get to get past the censors, but B, the natural kind of resentment that a 1960s audience would have of having to watch what we now call queer coded characters, but it's there and it's in there. And it is interesting that it takes somebody like Van Sant to really see that, to the point where he was able to put that into a remake in 1991. But now, because, and I give a lot of credit to the type of criticism and the type of analytic work that is being done now, I can watch this film today as a straight cis man and see it all over. Whereas, of course, I would have never seen that in 1991 because Wells's craft is so good. A film like Hitchcock's Rope, where again, he uses like a Farley Granger. But what is he suggesting about homosexuality is another question, and not one I'm going to be good at answering. But it is there that this is not as much a father-son relationship as it is, very similar to what other kings like Edward II with Piers Galveston and Richard II with his favorites were being accused of. And it is interesting that when he finally got his chance to do Falstaff, he chose to do it through this lens. And I think there's something to be said about that, because love or hate, and I'm not on the hate side, but The Trial, that is his version of Franz Kafka, and love or hate this movie, this is his version of Shakespeare. Every scene with the camera basically setting on the floor in as wide an angle as he could do without distorting the image is Orson Welles. But by telescoping it the way he did, he also put Orson Welles' imprint onto the actual structure of the play, and it now has a completely different meaning than the one that Shakespeare originally intended. And on that note, I think I'll start wrapping up the room. So I'm going to do a once around, and we'll go in current PTR order. Let me just refresh. And anybody who's in the audience who wants to speak, just raise your hand. But final thoughts on Chimes at Midnight, and we'll start with New York Times bestselling author Hy Bender.
Thank you. First of all, I'm delighted, Mark, Adam, Matt, that you could join us. Please don't be strangers. Always awesome to have you in any room, especially a film room like this one. Eric, thank you for choosing a film that I would never have watched if you hadn't assigned it. And it was an experience. So I appreciate that. And I just a couple quick things about the the battle that I forgot. Beatrice said it's astounding. Beatrice Wells said it was astounding what he managed to do. He's creating a battle that's supposed to have, tens of thousands of soldiers in it, and often, I'd walk by and I'd see there were like three guys and a dog, and he managed to make that work. Um, the strategy he used was uh, um, blow response, blow response, blow given, blow received, blow given, blow received. That was his directorial strategy for that in these quick cuts, and so he made that work. Um, I'm gonna end with what Roger Ebert wrote in his review in 2006. This is before a restoration. The crucial point about Chimes at Midnight is that although it is rejected by audiences and many critics on its release, although some of the dialogue is out of sync and needs to be adjusted, although many of the actors become doubles whenever they turn their backs, although he dubbed many of the voices himself, although the film was assembled painstakingly from scenes shot when he found the cash, although all of these things are true, it is a finished film, it realizes his vision, it is the Falstaff he was born to direct and play, and it is a masterpiece.
Thank you. Hi, Mark. Any final thoughts on Orson Welles in general and Chimes at Midnight in particular?
Well, I'm not going to argue with Roger in that case because I think Roger is absolutely right there. Um, you had mentioned this earlier. We were talking about financing the financing, running off to appear in someone else's film to get the cash together to continue shooting a project. And I think it is within the Bogdanovich interviews where, and this hits me right in the heart. This is just something amazing. Wells, in addressing raising money, his eyes change. It's palpable. And he basically says, and I paraphrase, that it's soul crushing. And that hovers with me. And then the only other thing I'll say is this is where I come out and I plug the Criterion channel again. Because, yes, the restoration is available, but it is Chimes at Midnight is on the Criterion channel, and all of their extras are there as well, from the audio commentary to interviews with various people. The Criterion channel is, they took over after Film Struck went belly up. It's indispensable for me. The combinations of independent films, classic films, foreign films is always wonderfully curated. So that's my plug for them. Great room. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. You helped make it great. Adam, your final thoughts on Orson Welles and Chimes at Midnight?
Yeah, I think it's great that even though we didn't get as much of Orson Welles as we probably should have, and I still think Robert Wise holds a lot of responsibility for reshooting the ending of Magnus and Ambersons and all that, but Wells has some play in it as well, of course. So I think it's unforgivable what Wise did, a shill for the industry, and he was paid well in all sorts of ways by the industry, who continued to ostracize Wells for decades afterwards. It is a blessing that he was able to persevere and get financing to do films like this. I think it's one of my three favorite Shakespeare adaptations. I think this one, Polanski's Macbeth, and Kurosawa's Ron, I think really stand out. And this might actually be. Um, I also like and Bronnan's Hamlet too from '96. Uh, these are the absolute top, and I actually think maybe this is the best of them all. So wonderful suggestion selection, and I hope I think people are Criterion's given it a lot of love. I think it's gotten a lot of attention. Scorsese makes note that he thinks that this is the best battle sequence in all of film, and it's hard to argue with that. It just looks fantastic, and the use of editing and photography to stretch those few dollars Wells had to make it look so epic. It's really beautiful. Great film.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you for joining us. Matt, your final thoughts on, I know you hadn't seen it since college, but, in general, on
Sure.
Wells in general, or Falstaff on Crimes at Midnight.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think Chimes at Midnight is an inspired choice. It's one a lot of people haven't seen, as I mentioned, and it's Wells loved Shakespeare, and I'm just happy to see, what Shakespeare films we got from him. Even though it wasn't as many as perhaps we would have liked. I guess on a note of Shakespeare movies to recommend, I would from 2001. There's an interesting film called Scotland, Pennsylvania that has Christopher Walken. That's an adaptation of Macbeth in 1970s Pennsylvania. And then if you have BritBox, they have, I think, the complete collection of BBC television Shakespeare plays that aired on PBS from the late 70s and early 80s. And there's some pretty rare plays in there that might be the only film version, or if not close to it, of things like Pericles. But they also have like Macbeth and actors like Derek Jacobi. So those are an interesting watch. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, great recommendation. And also, if you're into the Shakespeare histories, the original R on YouTube, you can watch the original RSC version of everything from Richard II all the way through Richard III. So you've got all the Henry IV and Henry V and the Henry VI plays that was adapted into a TV series in the 1960s, and that also has Derek Jacobi in it, and as well as a lot of other future stars, including David Warner and Ian Holm. So Ian Holm plays Richard III in that. The other recommendation I would give, we did The Room on, which of course is the Peter Brook version of King Lear with Paul Schofield. Highly recommend that, and that one's also free on YouTube. Other than that, I'd like to just kind of go over our schedule. So next week we're going to start doing our May countdown to the 80th anniversary of D-Day, the invasion of Normandy. And we're going to be doing 1944 in film, and we're going to start with a little film called A Canterbury Tale by a pair of directors called Powell and Pressburger, aka the Archers, who, as regular listeners to this channel know, are my complete and total favorites. And then we're going to be continuing 1944 with the Laurence Olivier version of Henry V. The next week, and then we're going to finish it off with David Lean's adaptation of Noel Coward's this Happy Breed, before we do our panel request film of the month, which is going to be A Last Holiday, which was suggested by Mr. Highbender, starring Alec Guinness. So that's May for UK Cinema History. And remember, that's every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So yeah, we'll see you all next week for A Canterbury Tale. No, this is not Chaucer's Canterbury Tale. This is a World War II movie. Unless anybody else has anything else they want to say, or anything they are doing that they want to plug, I'll give you a second to do that, and then I'm going to close the room. Okay, in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Goodbye, everybody. Have a great night. Want to join the conversation? Every Thursday, we record on the Clubhouse app. Just follow the link in the episode description, and you can be a part of our panel.